everyone. Welcome. This is Professor Rasmussen, Chapter 5, Memory, Short-Term Memory, Working Memory. In this talk, I'm going to describe the capacity of STM. So the capacity of short-term memory. In the prior talk, we talked about the duration of long-term memory. The duration of short-term memory. And in respect to the duration, we talked about how it may be decay, but more than likely it is some interference, proactive interference. Well, here we're going to talk about how much information an individual can store. Now, there's a few different ways that a researcher can measure how much information a person can store in short-term memory, and we're going to talk about the digit span. Okay, so the capacity of short-term memory is relatively small. All right. The empirical evidence comes a lot from Mr. George Miller. Why did I call him Mr.? I don't know. It's Dr. George Miller. Very prolific, very famous cognitive psychologist. Was popular in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and so on, and later than that. But he did some work on himself and others in the 1950s on random strings of either numbers or letters, okay? And what he found is, just like the count is saying, 7 plus or minus 2, or what would it be like, 7 plus, yeah, I guess that's right, about right, plus and minus 2. So this is, on average, 5 to 9 bits, all right? Well, what is a bit? Well, I don't have a bit down here, but 7 plus or minus 2 bits. A bit is the smallest unit of meaning, the smallest meaningful unit. So 7 plus or minus 2 is 5 to 9 bits, which is the smallest unit that has meaning. That would be, you're given a string of letters, and you can remember on average in between 5 to 9, and the average is about 7. 7 letters or 7 numbers. That would be a bit. Okay, so the bit is the smallest unit that has meaning. We'll elaborate on the bits in just a second. But this is the work that he did. Now, George Miller found that it was 7. In much of his work, but present researchers have found that it might be actually a little bit less than that. So contemporary research finds that on average around six-ish, if I can speak properly. Somewhere in that region is what most people can remember when tested on the digit span task. So let's just give you an example. All right, so to do the digit span task, I would read you a series of numbers. Okay, so I'm just going to go to it. Don't look at this. All right. Well, actually, I'm not even going to go to it. I have a page for this, but I can just say some out loud here. So again, what you do is you just I will say the numbers, and there'll be one number per second. So one digit per second, and let's just do a few here, and I'll snap. And then you're going to have to write down the numbers, okay? And we'll likely do this in class, but let's just do one example here just to help this out, okay? And it won't be too difficult. All right, ready? Again, don't write them while I'm reading them. Write them when I snap. 4, 5, 9, 2. Okay, what'd you get? 4, 5, 9, 2. Okay, so if you got that, that's a digit span of 4. I think I read those a little quickly, but hopefully you get the point. You go higher, you go lower, you go to essentially a point where the individual does not get the numbers in the actual correct order, and then that would be the max for their digit span. Okay, so relatively easy task to understand. Is it a relatively easy task to do? Well, yeah, until you get to around the mark of like 7, 8, 9 digits, and then it gets really, really hard. So we'll do this in class, but essentially this is the digit span task. Now, I want you to do the digit span task one more time, and but I want you to not necessarily try to remember the numbers in, I think it was like 4, 5, so 9, 2, something like that. See, isn't that funny how quickly, that's a great example of just how quickly short-term memory, boom, is lost, is rather, interfered with. Information interfering with it. That information is pretty much gone if I don't rehearse that information. It's no longer there. I cannot be able to remember it. So great example of the duration of short-term memory. Very, very short. So let's actually try to do this, but not remembering it as in like 4 and 5, but put the numbers together and then put the last series of numbers together. So I'm going to show you it. You can look at it, and I'll say it out loud too. 1, 2, 5, 9, 8, 7. Okay, write those down. Okay, you got those, right? Okay, so write them down. Here they are, 12, 59, 87. Was that any easier? Well, we really don't know because we didn't do a digit span of 6. Now, is this a digit span of 6? Well, you'd think it's a digit span of 6, right? That you can remember this, but actually, what you're doing is you're putting these numbers together, the 1 and the 2 to make a 12, a 5 and a 9 together to make a 59, and then obviously the 8 and 7 to make 87. So this would actually be 3 bits, okay? So here, the bit is not each individual digit itself, but it is the conjunction, I guess you'd say the collaboration to make it a nice and easy. But the combination, putting these two numbers together, these two digits together, the 1 and the 2, that's actually 1 bit to make a 12. Same for the 59 and 87. So that was the, if you remember 1, 2, 5, 9, 8, 7, then that's 6 bits. If you put them together like 12, 59, 87, that's only 3 bits. So essentially you could potentially increase your digit span by doing such tactic, by putting these together. Now, what is that tactic called? Well, that's called chunking. Right? I know it's a funny name, right? Chunking. So chunking is it's something that people can do to try to increase their digit span. It really doesn't. It kind of cheats the system, I guess you'd say. You're not really increasing your digit span. You're just kind of cheating and putting them together to remember more information, but you're really keeping the same amount of bits that you can remember. So if you can remember 5 bits, you're going to remember 5 bits whether they're big bits or small bits. Okay? A really good example of this is juggling. So, if you can juggle, two bowling pins, then you can juggle 2 big bowling pins or you can juggle 2 small bowling pins. But once I give you that third bowling pin, boom, you're going to drop them. So if you can remember 2 bits, you can remember 2 bits small, you can remember 2 bits large. If I give you that third bit, boom, you're going to forget them, you're going to drop them. Okay, so really nice analogy in that chunking and short-term memory is very, very similar to juggling. Okay, so here's actually some evidence for chunking, and this will be the last piece that we actually talk about. So this is kind of cool work done by Chase and Simon in 1973. And what these researchers did is they looked at memory from individuals of chess pieces on a board. So what they did is they had chess masters, and I'm just going to read this. They had chess masters versus novices try to recall after seeing, okay, they obviously saw the chessboard, and they saw these chess pieces on a board where the pieces were either in one of 2 different locations. So in one group, the participants saw that the pieces were in an actual location, all right, versus in another situation, the people saw these chess pieces just placed randomly on a board. Okay, so what's the independent variable or variables, and what's the dependent variable? Great question, okay? Think about it, okay? So how many independent variables? Yep, there are 2. How many dependent variables? There is 1. So think about what they are. Take a pause, hit the pause button really quick, and write down the independent variable and its levels. Write down independent variable number 2 and its levels, and then write down the dependent variable. Okay, so here they are. So if you said the first independent variable is experience, you'd be right on the mark. Second independent variable is piece position. Let me elaborate. Experience was separated into 2 different categories, the chess masters versus the beginners. The piece position was separated into the real chessboard locations versus random positions. Okay, so 2 independent variables, experience and piece position, and each of those independent variables had 2 levels. Okay, now if you're looking at the dependent variable is simply memory after viewing the board. Okay, some sort of recall. All right, if the participants could recall where those chess pieces were located. So DV was memory as operationalized, that is defined as the memory of the chessboard in respect to if the participants could match those pieces back up to what they previously saw. Okay, so that's the independent variables and dependent variables. Let's look at the results really quick. So here's basically the results. What you can see is in this figure, you have the master versus the beginner, and yeah, the master does a lot better. but this is for the actual game piece positions. Okay, so this is the master versus the beginner for the actual game positions, and that makes sense. The master is able to quickly look at the board and remember where those chess pieces go based off of experience with the game. However, the beginner, the novice, they kind of look at the board and they can't really remember where those pieces go because they don't have experience. This doesn't map onto experience. They're not making, these bits, these larger bits out of this. Okay, so master does better because can chunk based on game positions. Doesn't that sound kind of funny? Master does better because can chunk based on game positions. That does not make any sense. Well, I mean, it kind of does. Basically, what this sentence is trying to say is that they can chunk because they have experience with the game. So that experience with the game allows them to chunk these pieces, not just one individual piece. Not increase their actual digit span, but take a few of those pieces and kind of chunk them together in a position here and then another positions here. The rook and the knight here, the king and the queen maybe over here, so on and so forth. Now, let's look at what happens when an individual, the master versus the beginner, is looking at random positions. What do you think might happen there? Exactly. There's no advantage, possibly because the individual can't chunk those pieces together. Okay, the master, because there's nothing that they can rely on in their long-term memory to help create chunks, to help put those pieces together. Their digit span is essentially taxed out at a pretty low level, somewhere around 3-ish, just like the beginner. So the interesting thing what this is suggesting is that a master and a beginner, they have the same type of memory. It's not like the master is better, okay, at memory. They don't have a better memory. It's just they only have a better memory, the master, when they can rely on information that they've already learned and they've experienced to when they can map it onto experience. And that makes sense for a lot of things, right? If you've ever seen a carpenter or an artist, you go into, let's pretend you're with a carpenter, and a carpenter sees a house that's being built. It's very likely that if there's a novice, if there's a beginner, someone who's not a carpenter with a carpenter, that carpenter is going to be able to remember many more aspects about the house, directly after the task or viewing the house. Why? Because they can start to chunk things together, and that's possible. Now again, it could be storing things into long-term memory too, but maybe it is also chunking pieces together. That is the ability that allows them to remember more. Okay, so this is some evidence for chunking, and this is the capacity of short-term memory, which is oftentimes defined as 7 plus or minus 2, but really it's around 6-ish. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Have a great one.